Girl shocks everyone by saying, "I'm Marilyn Monroe, and I can prove it." Her revelations surprise everyone. The projector light flickered across the darkened lecture hall as the iconic image of Marilyn Monroe in her white halter dress from The 7-Year Itch filled the screen. Dr. Richard Bennett paused the documentary, turning to face his Film History 302 class at Columbia University. This moment became one of the most recognizable images in cinema history, he explained, gesturing toward the frozen frame. Yet beyond the glamour, Marilyn Monroe remains one of Hollywood's most misunderstood figures. Despite countless biographies, documentaries, and studies, significant gaps remain in our understanding of her private life and the circumstances surrounding her death. From the third row, a hand rose. Dr. Bennett nodded toward Emma Collins, a 20-year-old film studies major whose striking resemblance to a young Norma Jean had not gone unnoticed by her classmates. Actually, her death wasn't nearly as mysterious as people make it out to be, Emma stated with unexpected authority. The official narrative about suicide never made sense because she was planning a press conference for the following Monday. She had finally decided to go public about. Emma stopped abruptly, seeming to catch herself. The classroom had fallen silent, students turning in their seats to stare at the blonde whose usual quietness had suddenly transformed into confident assertion. "That's an interesting theory, Miss Collins," Dr. Bennett responded, his academic interest piqued. "Though I'm curious about your source. That detail about a planned press conference isn't mentioned in any scholarly work I'm familiar with." Emma's cheeks flushed slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "It wouldn't be in any book," she said quietly, "because I'm the only one who knows." A ripple of whispers spread through the classroom. "Doctor," Bennett raised an eyebrow, moving to continue the lecture, when Emma spoke again, her voice suddenly clear and resolute. "I'm Marilyn Monroe, and I can prove it." The classroom erupted in snickers and eye rolls. Someone in the back row made a sarcastic comment about delusions of grandeur. Dr. Bennett raised his hand for quiet, his expression a mixture of concern and professional curiosity. "That's quite a claim, Miss Collins. Perhaps we should continue this discussion after class?" But Emma had already risen from her seat. Her usual shyness completely vanished. "No disrespect intended, Professor, but I've spent years keeping this to myself. Now that I've finally said it aloud, I'd like to continue, if that's all right." Dr. Bennett, known for his unorthodox teaching methods and genuine interest in student perspectives, made a split-second decision. "You have 5 minutes, Miss Collins. The floor is yours." Emma moved to the front of the lecture hall, turning to face her peers. Gone was the reserved film student they'd known for 2 semesters. In her place stood someone with an unmistakable presence that commanded attention. "I was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles," she began. "My mother, Gladys, suffered from mental illness and couldn't care for me, so I spent much of my childhood in foster homes and orphanages." "Wikipedia is free for everyone," Jason Marshall called out from the back row, prompting scattered laughter. Emma didn't flinch. "My first foster home was with the Bolenders in Hawthorne. Ida Bolender had a Mickey Mouse figurine on the mantelpiece that I wasn't allowed to touch. She kept her sofa covered in plastic, and the house always smelled like furniture polish mixed with pot roast on Sundays. This isn't in any biography." She turned to Dr. Bennett. "My bedroom at the Brentwood house, the last house, had Mexican tiles that I specifically selected for their imperfections. I loved how each one was slightly different. Behind the headboard, one tile had a small chip that looked like a crescent moon. I would touch it for luck each night before sleeping." The professor's expression shifted subtly. As a Monroe scholar who had visited the restored Brentwood house for research, he knew about the distinctive Mexican tiles, though they were rarely mentioned in mainstream accounts. The detail about the chipped tile, however, was something he'd never heard before. Emma continued, her voice taking on a cadence and tone that seemed somehow altered from her usual speech patterns. Joe DiMaggio brought me yellow roses every week for 20 years after my death. But what no one knows is that he actually hated roses. He was allergic to them. I loved them, though. The first time he brought me roses was after our third date. We were at Chasen's restaurant, and I mentioned that no one had ever given me yellow roses. The next day, 6 dozen arrived at my apartment. We had a private joke about it. I would say, "Achoo," when I wanted him to kiss me, because that's what he always did around the flowers. Sneezed, then kissed me and said, "Worth it." Dr. Bennett's academic interest was fully engaged now. The relationship between Monroe and DiMaggio was well documented, as was his decades-long tradition of sending roses to her grave. But this intimate detail about allergies and their private joke, this was either an extraordinary fabrication or something impossible for Emma Collins to know. "There's a diary," Emma said suddenly. "Everyone thinks all my private writings were collected after my death, but there's one final diary that was never found. It's still in the Brentwood house, hidden in the space behind the built-in vanity in the master bathroom. There's a loose panel that slides back if you press the bottom right corner. I hid it there 3 days before I died." The classroom had grown completely silent, the initial mockery replaced by captivated attention. Even the skeptics were listening now. "What's in this diary?" Dr. Bennett asked, unable to maintain his professional distance. "Everything," Emma replied simply. "The truth about the Kennedys, my conversations with Jay, Edgar Hoover, my plans for the future, and most importantly, what really happened the night I died." After class, Dr. Bennett invited Emma to his office. As they walked across the campus quad, he observed her closely, this ordinary student who had just made an extraordinary claim. "How long have you had these memories?" he asked carefully. Emma sighed, seeming relieved to finally discuss it openly. "They started when I was 13. At first, they were just vivid dreams about being someone else, living in different houses, wearing beautiful clothes. But they weren't like normal dreams. They didn't fade in the morning. They accumulated, building on each other like real memories. And you believe these are genuine memories of being Marilyn Monroe?" "I know how it sounds," she acknowledged. "I've spent years trying to explain it to myself. I researched psychological conditions, false memory syndrome, everything I could think of. But these memories contain details I couldn't possibly know. Private conversations, the way certain fabrics felt against my skin, the taste of specific cocktails I've never actually had in this life. And there are so many of them. Thousands of detailed memories spanning decades." In his office, Emma elaborated further, describing childhood experiences, private moments from Monroe's marriages, and specific details about film sets that aligned with documented history but included personal perspectives never published. "Let's talk about this diary, Doctor," Bennett said, still skeptical but increasingly intrigued. "You understand that anyone could claim a hidden diary exists, knowing it would be difficult to disprove." "That's why I mentioned where it is," Emma replied calmly. "The diary can be found and verified. It's written in green ink. I always used green ink in my last years because Arthur Miller once told me it was the color of truth." Doctor Bennett made notes, his academic mind cataloging testable claims. "Arthur Miller preferred green ink himself," he commented. That's documented in his papers at the University of Texas Archives. I know, Emma nodded. I'm the one who got him started on using it. Before me, he used blue. This detail, if true, would be nearly impossible to verify, yet specific enough to be significant. Bennett felt a growing uncertainty about his reflexive dismissal of Emma's claims. Tell me something else, something verifiable that isn't public knowledge, he challenged. Emma thought for a moment. In my bedroom closet in the Brentwood house, I scratched my real initials, NJM for Norma Jean Mortensen, into the back wall, low near the floor. I did it the week I moved in, using the corner of a metal coat hanger. No one knows it's there because it's behind where the shoe rack was installed. Dr. Bennett made another note. If true, this was something concrete that could be investigated. Why reveal this now? He asked. Why in my classroom, of all places? Emma's composure faltered slightly. I saw the documentary footage today and something just broke open. Watching myself on that screen while sitting here in this different body, it created this strange disconnect. For years, I've been trying to understand why I have these memories, why I've been given this strange second chance. I think there's a purpose to it, which is to correct the record, to tell the truth about certain things that got buried with me, with her, with Marilyn, she said, struggling with pronouns, particularly about how she died. It wasn't suicide, Professor Bennett, and I can prove that too. As the afternoon light faded in his office, Dr. Bennett found himself facing a decision that could potentially upend his academic career, whether to investigate Emma Collins' claims about being the reincarnation of Marilyn Monroe, beginning with a hidden diary that, by all official accounts, couldn't possibly exist. If we were to look for this diary, he began tentatively. You mean when we look for it? Emma corrected with a hint of Marilyn's famous smile. Because you know you're too curious not to, Dr. Bennett. And isn't that what real scholarship is about? The pursuit of truth, no matter how improbable it seems. Despite himself, Bennett found he couldn't disagree. I'll make some calls, he conceded. The current owners of the Brentwood house are collectors of Monroe memorabilia. They might be persuaded to allow a search, especially if it's framed as academic research. Thank you, Emma said, gathering her things to leave. At the door, she turned back, her expression suddenly vulnerable. You know, the strangest part isn't remembering being her. It's remembering dying. That's what convinces me these aren't just imagined memories or things I've read. Who imagines their own death in such detail? After she left, Bennett sat at his desk for a long while, contemplating the remarkable conversation. As a scholar who had dedicated much of his career to separating Marilyn Monroe, the person, from Marilyn Monroe, the construct, he knew how many questions remained unanswered about her life and death. He also knew how many charlatans and attention-seekers had emerged over the decades, claiming special knowledge or connection to the iconic star. Yet, something about Emma Collins' claims felt different. The specificity of her memories, the obscure details that aligned with documented facts but extended beyond them, her lack of obvious motivation. It was either the most elaborate hoax he had encountered or something he had no framework to explain. He picked up the phone and dialed a colleague in Los Angeles. Charles, it's Richard Bennett. I need a rather unusual favor regarding the old Monroe property in Brentwood. The California sun cast long afternoon shadows across the Spanish-style Brentwood property as Dr. Bennett, Emma, and Charles Whitman, an architectural historian specializing in Hollywood homes, stood in the driveway. The current owners, Martin and Eleanor Friedman, avid Monroe collectors who had purchased the property 5 years earlier, greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. We've had paranormal investigators, psychics, and conspiracy theorists all request access over the years, Martin explained as he led them through the front entrance. But a Columbia professor, accompanied by a student who claims to have been Marilyn in a past life, that's a first. Emma moved through the house with visible emotion, trailing her fingers lightly along walls and door frames. "You've restored it beautifully," she commented. "The living room is almost exactly as it was, except the sofa was angled differently. She liked to see the garden from where she sat." Eleanor Friedman raised an eyebrow. "We actually discovered evidence of wear patterns on the floor, suggesting the original furniture placement was different from the historical photographs. We repositioned things last year based on those findings." Dr. Bennett observed Emma carefully as she navigated the house. Either she had done extraordinarily detailed research on the property, or something more inexplicable was occurring. The architecture and major design elements were documented in books and documentaries. But Emma's knowledge extended to peculiar details. A patch of discolored ceiling in the guest room that she attributed to a leak in 1961, the specific direction certain doors swung, the location of a now-covered telephone outlet behind the kitchen cabinets. "The bathroom is this way," Emma said, leading them down the hallway to the master suite. "I remember the day the vanity was installed. The worker had a crew cut and a tattoo of an anchor on his forearm. He smelled like Old Spice and cigarettes. He let me hold his tools while he secured the cabinet to the wall. That's when I noticed the space behind it. The master bathroom had been renovated since Monroe's time, but the built-in vanity remained in the same location." Martin Friedman looked dubious as Emma knelt beside it, running her hand along the bottom edge of the wooden structure. "It's here," she said, pressing firmly against the right corner panel. "You have to push, and then slide to the left." Nothing happened. Emma frowned, pressing again with more force. "It's been painted over. There used to be a small gap here." Charles Whitman knelt beside her, examining the woodwork with a professional eye. "There are multiple layers of paint. If there was once a movable panel, it could be sealed shut now." Dr. Bennett turned to the Friedmans. "Would you be opposed to our attempting to open it? Any damage would be professionally repaired, of course." Eleanor hesitated. "We've maintained the historical integrity of this house for years. If there really is a hidden diary, it would be the most significant Monroe discovery in decades," Dr. Bennett pointed out. "As the property owners, you would naturally have certain rights regarding any found items." After a brief private consultation, the Friedmans gave their permission. Charles called a restoration specialist he knew in Los Angeles, who arrived within the hour equipped with tools designed for minimally invasive historical renovation work. As they carefully examined the vanity, Emma sat on the edge of the bathtub, eyes closed, clearly emotional. "This bathroom is where I spent my last conscious moments," she said quietly. "I remember the cool tile under my feet, the sound of the telephone ringing in the bedroom, voices in the hallway that weren't supposed to be there." The specialist worked meticulously, identifying a nearly invisible seam in the wood panel. With surgical precision, he loosened the layers of paint and eventually revealed a cleverly designed sliding mechanism. "There's definitely something here," he confirmed, carefully working the panel free. "The craftsmanship is consistent with 1960s custom cabinetry. This wasn't in the original plans. It was an aftermarket modification." As the panel finally slid open, everyone in the bathroom held their breath. Behind it was a shallow recess, dusty with decades of isolation from the outside world. And there, wrapped in what appeared to be a silk scarf, lay a small leather-bound book with a tarnished metal lock. "That's it," Emma whispered, her face pale. "That's my diary." The key was on my keychain, which should have been on my nightstand the night I died, but mysteriously disappeared from police evidence. Charles carefully removed the wrapped package using archival gloves. The silk, once vibrant blue, had faded and grown brittle with age. Inside was indeed a small leather diary, its pages yellowed but intact. Without the key, they couldn't open the lock without risking damage to the historic item. "We need a professional conservator before attempting to open it," Dr. Bennett advised, "and legal consultation regarding ownership." The discovery created an immediate dilemma. Technically, anything found in the house belonged to the Friedmans, yet the potential historical significance made this complicated. After tense negotiation, a compromise was reached. The diary would be professionally examined at a respected conservation laboratory, with representatives from Columbia University, the Friedmans, and the Monroe estate present. 3 days later, in a climate-controlled laboratory at UCLA, a conservator carefully examined the lock mechanism. "We can open this without damaging the original hardware," he explained. The diary appears remarkably well preserved, protected from light and moisture in that hidden compartment. As cameras documented the process, the lock was carefully manipulated open. Martin Friedman, as the property owner, was given the honor of opening the diary for the first time. Inside, written in distinctive green ink, was Marilyn Monroe's handwriting, already authenticated by comparison with known samples. Dr. Bennett watched Emma's face as the diary was examined. She showed no triumph or excitement, only a deep sadness as she nodded at certain passages, as if confirming memories. The diary's contents were extraordinary. Personal reflections dating from April to August 1962, Monroe's final months. It contained detailed accounts of conversations with the Kennedy brothers, references to wiretaps she had discovered in her home, and her growing fear that she had become a liability to powerful men. Most significant was the entry dated August 3, 1962, just 2 days before her death, outlining her plans for a press conference the following Monday, where she intended to tell the truth about everything, consequences be damned. "This is remarkable," Dr. Bennett acknowledged, struggling to maintain academic detachment. "If authenticated, this would fundamentally change our understanding of Monroe's final days." "It will be authenticated," Emma said with certainty. "Every word is genuine." Over the following weeks, extensive testing confirmed the diary's authenticity. The paper, ink, and binding were all consistent with the time period. Handwriting analysis verified it was indeed Monroe's writing. Most convincingly, the diary contained verifiable information about Monroe's movements and appointments during those months that aligned perfectly with recently declassified FBI surveillance records, information that had not been publicly available. The discovery made international headlines. Marilyn's lost diary found splashed across newspapers worldwide. The circumstances of the discovery, led by a young woman claiming to be Monroe reincarnated, added a sensational element that media outlets couldn't resist. Emma's life changed overnight. News vans parked outside her apartment. Talk shows clamored for interviews. Internet sleuths dug into her background, finding nothing remarkable about the quiet film student from Connecticut. She had no previous connection to Monroe memorabilia circles, no family ties to Hollywood, no explanation for her incredible knowledge besides her extraordinary claim. Dr. Bennett attempted to shield Emma from the media frenzy while continuing to document and investigate her claims. In his office, away from cameras and reporters, he conducted a series of recorded interviews, cataloging her memories of Marilyn's life in meticulous detail. "Let's try something different today," he suggested during their 5th session. "Instead of focusing on verifiable historical facts, tell me something about being Marilyn that wouldn't be in any biography." something personal about how it felt to be her. Emma was quiet for a moment, considering. Everyone thinks she was confident, this sex symbol who knew her power. But inside, I was always Norma Jean, scared, wondering when everyone would realize I was a fraud. Before every scene, I would be physically ill from anxiety. The only time that ever eased was when I worked with Laurence Olivier on The Prince and the Showgirl. He saw me throwing up before a scene and didn't judge. Instead, he told me he'd done the same thing throughout his early career. He taught me a breathing technique, 4 counts in, hold for 7, out for 8. I used it before every scene after that. Dr. Bennett made notes. Olivier's breathing technique is documented in his theater training, but I've never seen any account of him sharing it with Monroe, because he never told anyone, and neither did I. Emma replied, "It was a private moment of mentorship that I treasured." As these sessions continued, Emma revealed dozens of similarly specific memories. The exact scent of Monroe's favorite perfume mixture. She combined multiple fragrances rather than wearing just one. The precise way she applied her makeup, using techniques taught to her by a drag performer she befriended early in her career. Private nicknames she had for various studio executives. The most compelling verification came unexpectedly when Janice Reynolds, a 92-year-old former makeup artist who had worked with Monroe, saw Emma interviewed on television and contacted Dr. Bennett. "That girl knows things only Marilyn would know," Reynolds insisted during their meeting at her retirement home. She mentioned the white eyeliner trick we developed together. Marilyn had very deep-set eyes, and we created a technique using white pencil in a specific way that was never documented. We never told anyone exactly how we did it because Marilyn wanted it to be her secret, yet this girl described it perfectly. Other small but significant corroborations accumulated. Emma knew about a specific crack in the tile of Monroe's first apartment bathroom. When researchers checked the building records, they found documentation of that exact repair. She described the texture and pattern of a particular dress Monroe had worn for a private dinner with Joe DiMaggio. A dress never photographed, but mentioned in a letter from DiMaggio's estate recently made public. The psychological community took interest in Emma's case. Dr. Helen Margolis, a respected researcher in consciousness studies at Stanford, conducted extensive cognitive testing. Whatever the explanation, this isn't a case of research or coaching, Dr. Margolis concluded after weeks of evaluation. The breadth and depth of accurate information Emma possesses exceeds what could reasonably be acquired through study. She knows things that aren't merely unpublished. They're things that were seemingly unknowable to anyone except Monroe herself. Public reaction was divided. Religious groups debated the theological implications of reincarnation. Scientists proposed theories ranging from genetic memory to quantum consciousness. Skeptics suggested an elaborate fraud, though they struggled to explain how Emma could have accessed such obscure information. Throughout it all, Emma maintained a composed dignity that reminded many of Monroe herself. When asked by a particularly aggressive reporter how she could prove she wasn't simply an exceptional actress playing a role, Emma responded with a soft smile. "I spent my previous life pretending to be someone I wasn't, playing roles, fulfilling expectations, becoming what everyone wanted instead of who I was. In this life, I'm finally just being honest." The irony is that people find the truth harder to believe than any performance. 6 months after the diary's discovery, Emma demonstrated perhaps the most convincing evidence yet during a carefully controlled demonstration for a documentary. Without any prior notice or preparation, she was asked to perform one of Monroe's songs. Though Emma had no formal vocal training in her current life, when she sang "I Want to Be Loved by You," The vocal experts present confirmed she perfectly replicated Monroe's unique breathing patterns, vibrato, and tonal qualities, aspects of vocal production that are nearly impossible to imitate without years of specific training. It's not just similar, it's identical, confirmed a voice analyst from Juilliard. The voice is an instrument as unique as a fingerprint. What we're hearing violates everything we understand about vocal imitation. It's as if the same instrument is playing, despite being housed in a different physical body. As evidence mounted, Dr. Bennett found his skepticism increasingly difficult to maintain. During a private moment, after a particularly intense interview session, he finally asked the question that had been troubling him from the beginning. Why you, Emma? If reincarnation is real, why would Monroe's soul choose to come back now, in your body? What's the purpose? Emma looked out the window, her expression reflective. I think there was unfinished business, not just about setting the record straight about my death, but about reclaiming my story. In my previous life, I never controlled my narrative. Other people always told my story for me, defined who Marilyn Monroe was supposed to be. This time, I get to speak for myself. The television studio lights burned hot as Emma Collins sat across from Barbara Walters, who had come out of retirement specifically for this interview. In the 9 months since the diary's discovery, Emma had declined dozens of high-profile interview requests, making this exclusive conversation a major media event. What you're claiming challenges our fundamental understanding of life and consciousness, Walters began, her legendary direct approach immediately addressing the extraordinary nature of Emma's claims. How do you respond to skeptics who suggest this is an elaborate hoax, that you've somehow managed to research obscure details about Marilyn Monroe's life? Emma met her gaze steadily. I understand the skepticism. If our situations were reversed, I'd probably be skeptical too. But the diary's authentication has verified information I provided before it was found. Multiple experts have confirmed I know things that weren't documented anywhere. At some point, the simplest explanation becomes that I'm telling the truth. And that truth is that you are the reincarnation of Marilyn Monroe. I have all of Marilyn's memories, Emma replied carefully. I experience them as my own past. Whether you call that reincarnation or something else depends on your belief system. I'm less interested in the label than in what these memories can reveal. Walters leaned forward. Let's talk about the most controversial aspect of your claims, the circumstances surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death. You've stated publicly that her death was not suicide, as officially reported. What exactly are you suggesting? The camera zoomed in on Emma's face, capturing her expression as it shifted from the confident young woman to something more complex, a shadow of remembered fear. On the night of August 4th, 1962, I did not take my own life, she stated with quiet conviction. I had every reason to live. I had recently been rehired by Fox after being fired from Something's Got to Give. I was making plans for future projects. I had the press conference scheduled for Monday, where I intended to take control of my narrative for the first time. Who was responsible then? Walters pressed. I'm not here to accuse specific individuals, Emma replied. Many of the people involved are no longer living, but some of their institutional legacies continue. What I can tell you is that there were 5 people in my house that night who were never acknowledged in the official report. She then proceeded to name 3 men connected to a government agency and 2 others linked to organized crime figures, all of whom had documented connections to either the Kennedy administration or Sam Giancana's organization, though their presence at Monroe's house had never before been alleged. There are phone records, Emma continued. The telephone company maintained detailed logs of calls to and from my number that weekend. Those records were sealed under national security orders but still exist in archives. File number SC753-62 in the Federal Communications Commission. Records contains the complete log. No researcher has ever been granted access to that file. But I know exactly what it contains. Dr. Bennett, watching from the sidelines, felt a chill. Emma had never mentioned this specific file number to him during their sessions. If such a record existed and contained what she claimed, it would be extraordinary validation. These are very serious allegations, Walters noted. You're essentially describing a conspiracy to murder one of the most famous women in America and cover it up for over 60 years. The term conspiracy has become loaded, Emma acknowledged. But yes, that's exactly what happened. My death was not from an overdose of pills I took voluntarily. I was injected with pentobarbital after being physically restrained. The injection site was in the upper left thigh, an area not examined during the limited autopsy. The interview continued for another hour, with Emma providing specific, detailed information about the events leading up to Monroe's death. She described conversations, named individuals, and outlined a timeline that connected Monroe's relationships with the Kennedy brothers, her knowledge of classified information shared during intimate moments, and the growing concern among certain government officials that she had become a security liability. 3 days after the interview aired, drawing the largest television audience for a news program in over a decade, the Attorney General of the United States announced that the Department of Justice would review the circumstances surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death based on new information that has recently come to light. What followed was unprecedented. The file Emma had specifically mentioned, SC753-62, was located exactly where she had indicated. When a federal judge ordered it unsealed for review by investigators, it indeed contained telephone records showing calls between Monroe's residence and several government officials in the hours surrounding her death, directly contradicting the official narrative that she had been alone. Former classified documents from FBI and CIA archives were also released through Freedom of Information Act requests, revealing surveillance of Monroe that had previously been denied. Most significantly, a partial toxicology report was discovered that had never been included in the official autopsy findings, one that indicated the presence of substances consistent with Emma's claim about an injection. "It's extraordinary," Dr. Bennett told reporters as the investigation progressed. The specific details Emma provided continued to be verified through documents she could not possibly have accessed. We're witnessing either the most elaborate and impossible fraud in history, or something that fundamentally challenges our understanding of consciousness and memory. For Emma, the whirlwind of media attention and investigation took a visible toll. During a private session with Dr. Bennett, she confessed that the memories were beginning to fade. "It's like they've served their purpose," she explained, staring out his office window at the Columbia campus below. "Each time I share a specific memory, especially when it's later verified, it seems to lose its grip on me, like a burden being set down." "Are you afraid of losing the connection completely?" he asked. She considered this. "Not afraid, exactly. I think it's supposed to happen. These memories came to me for a reason. To correct a historical injustice. To reclaim Marilyn's voice and truth. As that purpose is fulfilled, I feel more fully Emma again. The memories are still there, but they're less immediate. More like watching a familiar film rather than reliving my own experiences." As the official investigation continued, Emma gradually withdrew from public appearances. She returned to her studies at Columbia, where she now focused on film production rather than film history. The university administration, recognizing the unique circumstances, granted her special accommodations to complete her coursework while maintaining privacy. 6 months into the investigation, federal prosecutors announced they had sufficient evidence to conclude that Marilyn Monroe's death was, in their carefully worded statement, inconsistent with suicide and consistent with homicide by persons unknown. While no charges could be brought due to the statute of limitations and the deaths of the primary suspects, the official cause of death was amended in county records. On the anniversary of the diary's discovery, Emma agreed to a final interview with Dr. Bennett for his academic paper on the case. They met in the same office where they had first discussed her extraordinary claims. "The memories are almost gone now," she told him, looking more relaxed and youthful than she had in months. "They feel like stories I've heard, rather than things I've experienced directly. It's a relief, honestly. Living with two sets of memories, two entire lifetimes, was exhausting." "Do you still believe you were Marilyn Monroe?" he asked, the academic in him still seeking clarity. Emma smiled. "I believe I carried her memories for a purpose. Whether that makes me her reincarnation or just a vessel for some kind of consciousness imprint, I don't know. What matters is that the truth came to light. And how does Emma Collins feel about her future now? The spotlight on you has been intense. I've had enough fame for 2 lifetimes," she laughed. "I'm declining the book deals and movie rights. I'm dating a nice, completely normal guy from my economics class who barely knew who Marilyn Monroe was before all this happened. I'm looking forward to a quiet career behind the camera instead of in front of it, living as Marilyn taught me the cost of being public property." Dr. Bennett nodded, understanding. "One last question. Given everything that's happened, everything you've revealed, and the way it's changed our historical understanding, do you have any regrets?" Emma considered this carefully. "In my life as Marilyn, I regretted never taking full control of my story. I let others define me, exploit me, and ultimately silence me. In this life, I've been able to correct that. So no, I have no regrets. Just gratitude that some form of justice, however delayed, was finally possible." 3 years later, Dr. Bennett published his comprehensive study of the case in a leading psychological journal. By then, Emma Collins had graduated with honors and moved to Austin, Texas, where she worked for an independent film production company. She had declined all further interviews and rarely spoke about her experiences. The Monroe investigation had ultimately identified 3 individuals, all deceased, who were likely involved in her death. While no criminal charges could be filed, the historical record had been corrected. Museums updated their exhibitions about the star's life and death. Biographers issued revised editions of their works. Film documentaries incorporated the new evidence. On a warm spring day, Dr. Bennett received a package from Texas. Inside was a copy of a film festival program featuring Emma Collins' directorial debut, a documentary not about Marilyn Monroe, but about ordinary women who had overcome extraordinary circumstances. The handwritten note read simply, "Moving forward, not looking back. Thank you for believing me. E." That evening, he watched a classic Monroe film, struck by how differently he now viewed the luminous figure on screen. Behind the iconic image, he now saw the complex woman whose story had finally been told truthfully, not by historians or biographers, but through the most unlikely of messengers. A young woman who, for a brief and remarkable time, carried the memories of a legend. In a small, private ceremony on the grounds of Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles, the headstone marking Marilyn Monroe's final resting place was updated. Below her name and dates, a new inscription had been added at Emma's request, containing words Monroe had written in her final diary but had never before been shared publicly. "Truth is a stubborn thing. It doesn't go away." 5 years after Emma's initial declaration in his classroom, Dr. Bennett received an invitation to her wedding. The photograph showed a smiling young woman who bore only a passing resemblance to Marilyn Monroe. The distinctive mannerisms and expressions that had once been so eerily familiar now completely absent. In their place was simply Emma Collins, a filmmaker in her own right, building a life entirely her own. He sent a congratulatory note with a quote from Rilke that seemed fitting. "The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us, long before it happens." Emma's case remained a subject of intense academic debate. Neurologists proposed theories about cellular memory and consciousness transference. Psychiatrists discussed the possibility of cryptomnesia on an unprecedented scale. Physicists contemplated quantum explanations for information persistence across time. Religious scholars found validation for ancient beliefs about the soul's journey. The definitive scientific explanation never came. For some, this absence of conclusive explanation proved the case was ultimately an elaborate fraud, despite the overwhelming evidence otherwise. For others, it represented the limitations of current scientific understanding when confronted with phenomena that transcended conventional explanation. Emma herself offered no further theories. Having completed what she viewed as her obligation to the truth, she embraced her life as Emma completely. On rare occasions when asked about her extraordinary past, she would smile and say simply, "That's a story that's been told now. I'm interested in new stories." In her home office, visible only to her, sat a small collection of items, the authenticated diary, now returned to her ownership after extensive study, a jar of face cream of the exact formula Marilyn had used, and a vintage photograph of Monroe at her happiest, laughing on a beach in California, momentarily free from the burdens of fame. Next to these mementos stood a framed news clipping announcing the amended findings on Monroe's death, officially acknowledging after 60 years that her passing had not been suicide. Below the article, Emma had written a single word: "Finally." The woman once known as the world's most famous sex symbol had been reduced by history to a tragic victim of her own demons. Through Emma, she had reclaimed her agency, her truth, and ultimately her peace. Two souls, or perhaps one soul across two lives, had found resolution together. And that, Emma believed, was the most beautiful ending either of them could have wished for.